My name is Ted Ellis. I am moderator for this evening's panel discussion, Black Art and Social Justice. When we talk about the responsibility of artists preserving their culture, history, and heritage and making a statement, that has happened for its entirety since 1619. Gathered today are two exceptional individuals that will tell their story, part of our narrative, and their struggles to speak about the importance of art and social activism, fighting for equality through images. That is Barbara Dunn Harrington, as well as Keith Golden, who will be presenting live for us today. Ms. Dr. Addie Dawson Yuba will not be able to be here because she's dealing with circumstances in New Orleans in the Baton Rouge area with the hurricane. But we will have a presentation for her. But I want to go ahead and introduce Barbara Dunn Harrington. She is former executive for the Tom Joyner Foundation. Barbara has done some exciting things over the last 40 years as it relates to community and student engagement. She has helped to give over 45,000 scholarships to African American students at HBCUs. Some of the discussions Barbara's going to talk about is how art has impacted our existence and has told our stories since the beginning of slavery here in the United States. I'm going to go ahead and yield the floor to Barbara Dunn Harrington. Barbara, good evening.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Ted. I am not an artist, I'm an art lover, and I didn't realize how much I loved art until I got really, really grown. I realized and thought about my childhood, where my passion came from. And my passion came from growing up in Tuskegee, Alabama, and just walking the campus, oftentimes not realizing I was surrounded by art all the time. As you approach the campus at Tuskegee University, there was an unbelievable sculpture of Booker T. Washington lifting the veil of ignorance off of a slave. And that was done by a very famous sculptor whose last name was Keck. After realizing that, I thought, oh my goodness. And then when I go to the Carbon Museum as a child, and then later to realize I was looking at George Washington Carver's works because he was an artist really before he became a scientist. So then let's go back to what was really surrounding us all this time. When we think about where social justice met us and where it started with us, it actually started with the Amistad and those slaves who really did not choose to come but were forced to come, and how that particular experience forced them to end up in Connecticut, excuse me, and having a trial there, which really turned out to be the real first civil rights case. John Quincy Adams tried that. But also, let's talk about and think about the unbelievable murals that are now at Talladega College that were all depicting the Amistad mural and that whole experience. So from there, we started our journey. And then the whole experience of historically Black colleges and Black art, and how wonderful an experience that is for our students. And my journey and my determination is to make sure our students get a chance to walk their campuses and not just walk by a beautiful monument every day and not realize where that started and how important that was. And that in campuses, you had great people like Henry O. Tanner's sister, who was the first doctor in the state of licensed medical doctor in the state of Alabama, regardless of her race. The great works that Tanner did. Um, Those are things that we want to always remember and keep in our minds as we share the combination between social justice, where it started, and how it crosses, and what the pivotal times were on that famous slave ship, and how those people ended up in Connecticut, and what happened after that, and where we are today. In
So
addition,
Barbara,
yes.
yeah, your engagement at the campuses, particularly with Talladega and the murals,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
restoration, the community impact, the community engagement. How was that transformative within that space?
That was one of the those murals had been sitting in Talladega College since 1931 and sitting in a very dark library and just kind of there. Everybody knew they were there, but no one really paid a whole lot of attention to what could be done and what the value of those murals were. And the fact that Hale Woodruff had done those murals in 1931, the seven panels that were so magnificent. And when you really started to study more about those murals and what they meant the beginning of everything, and how Hale Woodruff went between Atlanta, because he was teaching in Atlanta at the time, and then going out down to Talladega for 2 days a week to teach his art classes and also work on the murals. So we got together. I went up to Talladega and did some volunteer work, and then got hired as a consultant. A friend of ours, found a someone to come up and appraise the murals. They appraised at an unbelievable, magnificent value, and from there, the work started with a partnership with the High Museum of Atlanta. The restoration began, the cleanup, but also it gave Talladega College a whole new meaning, because it also they were able to then provide themselves with an awesome, awesome piece of art on their balance sheet. Moving forward, later, Dr. William Harvey, now the president of Hampton, who was also a Talladega alum, donated the funds to build the museum. So after the murals had toured the country, they were then able to go back to Talladega College, where they now have a successful home. And it's an unbelievable opportunity. And while every Black college or every HBCU may not have uh, the Hale Woodruff murals, they have comparable art. But we just got to get in those back cases and look for that art and bring it to the forefront as well. It's a wonderful opportunity to bring art and value to those institutions, and that is my goal.
Oh. So Barbara, are there any other HBCUs that you have participated with in bringing forth their treasures?
Not at that level. However, as you know, Hampton has an unbelievable collection. Dillard has an unbelievable collection, thanks to their alums such as yourself. Um, as you know, many, many years ago when HBCU started, oh, Fisk University, let's never forget that, and their invaluable collection. But as you know, um, during those times, Black artists were not able to show their works at mainstream galleries. So therefore, they worked at HBCUs, and for the most part, that is where their works remained. Now, my struggle is, and all of our struggles, including yours, Ted, is to make sure that doesn't happen again, and that we can bring this artwork to the forefront so everybody can know what invaluable art we have hidden at all of these schools. And that's what we do every day. We're forever looking. I was speaking with someone yesterday at a small college in the Mississippi Delta, to find out there's an unbelievable museum down there that needs some attention. And that where a lot of artists are buried in our unknown places. And for that, I am determined, and that is my mission, is to share. And as you know, Ted, you've been our supporter when I worked at the Tom Joyner Foundation and when we did cruises. We always brought our African American artists on so we could make sure that we sell art to our cruise partners and not sell them inferior art, but real African American art, and encourage people to increase their and start a collection. And that's our goal, and that's what we plan to continue.
Yeah, definitely an example of cultural awareness, even activism. One artist in particular that you've had a long-standing relationship with, particularly with the Tom Joyner Foundation, has been Mr. Frank Frazier. Can you talk about his images and the meaning and power behind his purpose in his paints?
Absolutely. Frank is so passionate about racial equality. He is passionate about sharing his works. I'm looking at a piece right now that he so strongly did, showing the Birmingham Fire Department and the famous hose situation, hosing Black people down as they continue to demonstrate. That's just an example of how Frank believes very strongly in his ability to share and demonstrate what the importance of putting this on paper. His latest means of painting is done with shoe polish, and many of these pieces are shoe polish images, and they are just absolutely magnificent. And to just look at these men hosing down demonstrators in downtown Birmingham it's as if you are still there looking at it and demonstrating, but Frank just really depicts it. Frank is very strong in his belief in bringing the African culture. A lot of his works, he uses African cloth, kente cloth, and other cloths that he personally would go to Africa to return back and use on his pieces of work. And those are such strong images, and they tell such strong stories. And those are the kinds of people and the kinds of images that we would always bring on the Tom Joyner cruise. Ted, a particular piece of yours that was always very powerful was the one of the old lady walking up the hill with her purse going to church. But this was after she had been all day long working in the white people's kitchen, and that you see that so strongly in those images. And that's what we want to share with our young people. We want them to know those images. We want them to understand that's not just some old lady walking up the hill to go to church with her purse on her arm. There's a story behind that. She's been in a kitchen all day, but she is not going to stop until she goes to church and spends her time with the Lord. And those are such strong images for our people to understand. And that's how our people believe, and that's what they believe. Um, the same as with the Amistad and the first scene of the mutiny. That's a powerful image of that many Africans forced to get on that ship. But in the end, those that survived and made it to Connecticut, to New Haven, and the court case is a powerful, powerful image. But in between that, there were other pieces that told that story of what happened to some of those people. Like some of them actually did later become Talladega College students. And that's depicted in one of the scenes of the opening day of Talladega College, because back in the
Yes.
1800s, you it was kind of like you didn't have to have any money to go to school. It was come one, come all. We'll take care of you and figure out how we'll help you work your way through school.
Right, right. You know what's interesting? Because when I thought about putting the panel discussion together, I knew your work that you had with the HBCUs and particularly with Talladega and the restoration of that mural. But also, I think about TSU and Dr. Biggers and his social commentary, his philosophy, and sharing the cultures through images. This iconography that spoke. Even the Hal Woodruff mural at Dillard University. It was about social action and social justice through those murals, the struggles, the inequities by policy and law and those murals, some of them are more than 60 years old. And in those murals, you see the same struggle that we're faced with today. What are the takeaways from that? The fact that artists are still engaged in the same kind of struggle that's reflective of what is happening in our communities and what we're facing as citizens in our community.
And you are right on point when you look at what those artists depicted and what they drew and sketched out and painted in 1931, uh, starting with Dr. Woodruff up to today. It's the same fight. We're still fighting. And we're still fighting for equality. We're still fighting to tell our story the way. And that's the same struggle that we had then that we have now. But the telling part about it is we have not given up and we're not going to give up. We're going to continue pushing this through. And somebody's going to hear this story. And as was mentioned in the video shown before us, this artwork is going to live long after we're gone, and somebody's going to understand it and be able to be able to say, oh, well, that was in 2020 and look what's happening now. So we're hoping and we know that this is going to tell the story, and people like us are going to wear people out until they listen to us. We know that much.
Yeah, I agree. Barbara, thank you. Before I'm gonna go ahead and move and introduce Keith Golden of Art by Golden, who has been actively engaging our communities for well over, I know, 30 years. Very intentional about preserving our culture, our history, our narrative, and making it a point to celebrate living contemporary African American artists. He's worked closely with artists like George Hunt. If you're familiar with that piece, I'm a Man. One of the other most powerful pieces he did was with the Arkansas Nine that Charlie Palmer did. And recently, he has started a social justice portfolio with several contemporary African American artists. Right now, I'd like to yield the floor to Keith Golden. Hey, Keith.
Hey Ted, how you doing?
Pretty
I
good, man.
thank you guys first of all for allowing me to participate with you on this forum this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to the dialogue and all of the things that we'll do together. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. I wasn't born there. I was born in Washington, D.C., but my life pretty much I was there in Memphis all of my life. So the introduction to social injustice started at an early age. Growing up in Memphis and all of the areas that we all see now with all of the photographs that we see on CNN and other places of what happened during that time period with Dr. King in the uh, late 60s when he was in Memphis for the sanitation workers strike. I actually lived that. So to see what happened and what's happening now, it's really what's going on right now is really like a derivative of what was happening then. It's the exact same thing with just a different twist. And now with the social media and all of the things that we have to capture these injustices, we can see even more of what was happening then. A lot of people would like to say, oh, there's no more problems, that things are just fine, but we know that isn't the case. But having the opportunity to look at the injustice and to experience it in Memphis, I wanted to focus on the solution. My focus was on the solution because that's what I was taught. I was taught not to dwell on the negative, but to look at the positive. What can we do? We know that there's a problem. It's obvious. We're living it. We're dealing with it economically. We're dealing with it emotionally, spiritually, and every other way. How can we work together to create a solution that's going to help us? So, the thing that I've always done in my practice from early on unto now in the industry of fine art, African American art specifically, I've made the decision to focus and to work in an area that I can help strengthen. So I became a publisher. I started publishing art actually as a young law student. I started law school in the early 90s and finished. But all of that time, I was working on publishing art and working with artists that were local and regional in the South. I moved to Denver in the very early 90s when I finished law school, and I continued the practice of working with visual artists. And so my focus was really on publishing, helping people to understand their intellectual property rights, dealing with contract negotiations, licensing, and all of that type of thing. So that's been my entry into the business. I have a passion for it, and it's something that I've enjoyed.
Keith, do you see African American artists receiving the same level of notoriety as mainstream artists, white artists?
I can a very stock answer to you, no. And the thing that I've always said again, we know that that's not the case. You can look at someone like a Sam Gilliam, for instance. Here's a man that's been uh, in this industry for a very very long time. His story has been documented. A lot of times people say, "Oh well, if you don't document your journey, and if you're not dealing with the academic world and all of those things, you can't expect to be considered an artist." People do. Well, here's a gentleman that has all of the things, all of the elements that you need to be considered at a certain level. He has all of those. And until the last decade or so, he hadn't started to get his real just due. I'm not saying he hasn't done well, but he really didn't start to get his just due until the last 8 to 10 years. And when you look at his work, you can compare it to some of his counterparts, because that was your question, like a Jackson Pollock. We'll just focus on him. When you look at the level of Jackson Pollock's work and the current market value of that work versus the current market value of a Sam Gilliam, it's like 50, 60 times over Sam Gilliam's work, which, according to me and what I see, Sam's work is as good or better. So, no, I don't think that the work of African Americans have achieved what it should have achieved by this point. However, again, I would love to focus more on the solution. We have to develop the artists that we're working with. We have to inform our client base, the collectors that are able to collect a Sam Gilliam. They need to understand where he's been, where he's gone, and where he is currently. What is his work really about? Why should I collect a Sam Gilliam? Where is his work lodged? What museum his work? What other large collectors have his work? When people are educated about this product, then you can start to see the growth in value, because people will start to value the work. There are many people in this world of African American descent and other that would like to collect that work, but they just don't have the education about the work itself. So that creates an issue. When we start to focus on the education and we start to share the documentation of this work, then we can start to see the growth. If we don't do it, don't expect others to do it for us. That's what I've always said. We must focus on developing the true narrative. Some people use that word narrative, and it's something that they want to create. It's not the truth. But now we're talking about forwarding a true narrative about what we have and what we're about. So that's been my focus, and that'll be the focus until the day I leave this business.
So let me ask you this, Keith. Going back to two of your projects, that leads to your most recent project. Why I Am a Man, and why the Arkansas Nine piece by Charlie Palmer, both with the African American artists.
Okay, sure. So the very first piece that you're speaking of was the I Am a Man series by George Hunt. George Hunt is an artist that grew up in Lake Charles, Louisiana. The majority of his life was in Memphis, Tennessee. At the time that Dr. King was assassinated, George Hunt was a school teacher. He was an educator, and he was a practicing artist and an art teacher at Carver High School. So during this time frame, George actually was one of the pallbearers for Dr. King's body, getting on one of the airplanes that escorted him back from Memphis to Atlanta. And during that time, he started to do a number of works of art that had to do with the sanitation workers strike. And he focused primarily on that sign that says, I am a man. I deserve the exact same things that you deserve as a man. We're both dealing with the sanitation and taking care of the city, making sure that it's clean, keeping people healthy. I'd like to drive the truck sometimes. I don't want to always be on the back of the truck. How about me developing the schedules for the other people that work in this industry versus always having the schedule developed for me? And oh, by the way, why not pay me the same hourly rate as the people that are my constituents that I work with daily that are doing the same exact work? So being introduced to George at an early age, I actually met him when I was 14. He was a coach in a youth program that I was part of. But I didn't know him as an artist until I became an art publisher. And this was in my late 20s. So one of the pieces that he had done years and years ago prior to me publishing it was titled, I Am a Man, #1. We decided to publish that piece of art, and a lot of people said, this is a seriograph. You know, one of the rules in this industry is that when you have a seriograph, you focus on the beauty and the aesthetics of the image. So they wondered, why do you have that big sign on this beautiful seriograph that says, I am a man? What is that all about? And so it allowed me the opportunity to really educate a group of people about what it was concerning. Now, here we are 30 something years later, and the I Am a Man icon, as I call it, is all over the world. And George Hunt was one of the first artists that I know of that started to use that as part of his aesthetics in his work. So that's why I focused on it, because it was something that was very meaningful, and it wasn't about the pretty image, but it was about the beautiful message that it conveyed to the world.
Right. Yeah. Now speak on the Arkansas Nine piece with Charlie Palmer.
Yeah. So the work of art that we did with Charlie Palmer, it's actually called Little Rock 9, 50 Years. Here in Denver, Colorado, one of the students, her name is Carlotta Lanier. Carlotta was one of the 9. She happened to be friends with Ernest Green. And I met Ernest Green, who was also one of the 9, in Philadelphia. He worked in the financial industry for many, many years, but I met him at an exhibit at Temple University. And when we met, we started to talk, and he was looking at the I'm a Man piece that we did by George Hunt, along with some other works. And he says, you know, I'm part of a group, and we're called the Little Rock 9. Have you ever heard of us? And I said, well, of course. I grew up in Memphis, and we started to talk. And he said, listen, I'd like to have you commission an artist on our behalf for the Little Rock 9 Foundation. We have our 50th year anniversary coming up, and we'd like to commission you to, or have you to commission an artist that you work with to do a piece that would represent us well. And he says, oh, by the way, Carlotta Lanier lives in Denver, so that's who you're going to actually work with on this project. So we had many, many meetings, and I won't bore you with all of the details, but by the end of the day, maybe 6 or 7 months later, Charlie Palmer had created a wonderful work that dealt with, it was almost like a retrospective. It dealt with the 50-year span from the time that these people were young high school students until the very day that they were adults and, working in their own industries and all over the country, doing various things. We had a sit down dinner in Denver, Colorado at that time to unveil that work. There were 700 people there for this event. All 9 of the Little Rock 9 were there. This was pre social media, if you will. We didn't have Instagram, we didn't have Facebook and all of these things. But we took many pictures and had a wonderful time just discussing the 50-year span. What had they gone through? What were some of the things that they dealt with? How did they get past it? And it was just a wonderful time to see those 9 people and to listen to their stories and how they were able to handle this whole process. So that was the reason that I did that piece, because again, it's always been an interest of mine to deal with documenting what really happened, and not what really happened based on someone else's narrative, if you will, but what happened truthfully from the mouths of the people that were part of the situation. So I was blessed with the opportunity to meet Mr. Green, who in turn introduced me to Carlotta, and Charlie, again, a dear, dear friend. Uh, Worked with him for over 25 years in his business, with publishing many of his works and moving many of his original works of art around the world. So it was just a great fit. He did a wonderful job, and that's one of his iconic pieces even to this day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And recently, Charlie was featured on the cover of Time magazine with the issues surrounding the social inequities that we're faced right now. Um, Keith, before you go, just can you expound on your current project and your purpose behind your current project when we speak about social justice?
Sure. Right now, we're working on a project, and we've had our first installation. The name of the project is Our Portfolio on Social Justice: The Artist, the Art, and the Conversation. So, this project features 10 artists that will do works of art of their own choosing, and they're going to deal with various areas of social justice, social injustice. Some of it may deal with the solutions to some of the problems that we have in this country and around the world. And our idea is to do the artwork so that we create something aesthetically that people can see, but also we want to talk to the artists and engage other people that are art collectors and art lovers in the conversation about social injustice, social justice, and the solutions. So we create a conversation that we can all participate in. And really, what got me to this point is, I focused a lot on some of the earlier artists like Romare Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, Elizabeth Catlett, and the like. And they had a group, if you will. It really wasn't like an organization, but it was kind of a loose knit group called Spiral. And what they did in Spiral is they met together once a week or however often they met in New York, and they talked about each other's work. They spoke about what they liked, what they didn't like. They talked about the social climate, the political climate, racism, everything that was going on in that time. And as a result, there were so many wonderful ideas that were born out of those meetings that they had with Spire. As a matter of fact, one of the artists that I do a lot of work with even today, his name is James Denmark. He's in his mid 80s currently, but he worked with Romare Bearden and Elizabeth Catlett and Jacob Lawrence, and he was a young artist at that time. he had the opportunity to listen in on many of those meetings, and we've had conversations that kind of led me into the idea of creating this portfolio. So not creating the portfolio, but coming up with the idea and using it to help to galvanize some of the artists that we work with. And those artists in turn will be able to speak with people about the work, about our social climate currently, and solutions.
Yeah, I agree with you, Keith. It's interesting what you mentioned that we need to be more solution oriented. Definitely when we look at the challenges and disparities around, cultural equity and opportunity for artists, and we're looking at social justice, we need to have more programming inside of museums, on the programming side as well as on the acquisition side of it, that's sustainable. And so, I applaud you and your 30 plus years of art activism, getting the message out in partnership with the artists in community, having a strong sense of historical importance and activism in our community. Lastly, before we move on, I want to speak a little bit about Dr. Addie Dawson Yuba, who's a retired professor at Southern University School in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. For more than 30 years, she was active in the space of teaching and instructing, but also participating with several other artists at historically Black colleges and universities. That association, National Alliance of African American Artists at Historically Black Colleges and University. Just like Keith mentioned, these artists would get together, these scholarly artists would get together and think about strategically how to effectuate change through their art. They would demonstrate that with putting on exhibitions throughout the country. And it's still going on to this day. Unfortunately, we didn't have the opportunity tonight to have Addie speak to us directly, but she did provide a video that we'd like to show and share with the audience.
Good evening. My name is Addie Dawson Yuba, and I'm sorry I can't be with the live panel this evening. Some of you may know we're bracing for another hurricane here in Louisiana. I would like to begin with the implicit bias within cultural institutions. While I was the chair of the Visual Arts Department at Southern University, my faculty and I participated in many exhibitions at various HBCUs throughout the country. And it was a very good experience because I met so many African American artists and gotten to know all their work. So it was a wonderful experience. The pieces that I'm going to speak a little bit about tonight have been in many exhibitions of these HBCUs. The Requiem of an Unwritten Manifesto. This work speaks to the self-hatred that some Black women have toward their dark skin. And in many Black countries and societies with women of color, they have bought into this $5 billion bleaching of skin to make them acceptable, tolerable, and maybe somewhat beautiful in their civil society. But we have to be concerned about what is the aesthetics of beauty in one's culture. This is something that we truly need to teach our young girls. And the next piece, the Mark Men, this piece depicts the social injustice and brutality against Black men that we've seen all over our TV screen. There's 50 heads that represent all 50 states that shows that Black men are locked up throughout our country in the prison system of America. In The Liberation of Aunt Jemima, this piece was inspired by Betty Saar's piece, Liberation of Aunt Jemima, and it speaks to the injustice of black women and what we have suffered long before the suffrage that we're the 100th year of the women's suffrage. But we all know that Lady Liberty has never welcomed Black people to her shores. And I really concentrated more on the Africans that were forced onto the ships and died during the Middle Passages. And as you see that Aunt Jemima character coming up the side of the dress of liberty, and then around the waist. Those characters of Aunt Jemima depict the slaves that had died, as I said, through the Middle Passage. Well, thank you, and hopefully the next time you'll get a chance to see me in person. Good night. Good night.
So, in closing and in conclusion, when we talk about Black art and social justice, we can reflect and see that it has been ongoing since our first arrival as enslaved Africans on the White Line ship in 1619. From the arc of 1619 to right now, we have over 47 million African Americans looking for racial justice and equity, having power and control over our narrative. We see that artist has played a specific and important role in documenting and advocating the importance of history, our culture, our being. Has been very deliberate and intentional in fighting for constructive change. We know that everything that happens in the United States, particularly centered around racial equity, is in policy that's typically based on culture. So when we talk about systemic racism, it is culturally centered and culturally based. Our academic institutions, our cultural institutions that provide a methodology of learning, of engaging, of telling the truth so that the public can understand our importance as human beings. Definitely is a reason why our paint and are purposeful about their paint, and those in the ecosystem of participating and supporting the intentionality knows that it's vitally important for our existence as we move forward and we build a better society in solidarity together. I want to thank Pigment International for having the vision and the fortitude and the fight and having a sense of resiliency, just like our cultural warriors and bearers like Samela Lewis, Elizabeth Catlett, Dr. Margaret Burroughs, Betty Sars, all the women who were not only artists, but were institutional builders that understood the importance that our culture, our history matters. It is our makeup. Lastly, I want to thank our panelists for participating. Barbara Dunn Harrington, thank you. Keith Golden, thank you. Dr. Addie Dawson Yuba, thank you for providing your experiences, your knowledge, so that we can improve our value and our work, not only to ourselves, but to our communities. We're going to give a time for Q&A at this moment so that the audience can have this opportunity to ask questions. So please feel free to engage myself and the panelists. This has been a wonderful experience. I've learned a lot in conversation. Barbara, I know you can have a whole session by yourself, as well as you, Keith Golden. It's a pleasure having you guys not only as colleagues, but as a friend, as a family. So thank you very much. So at this moment, we're going to go ahead and take questions from the audience. So I know one of the questions is, and Keith, I'll direct this to you, and Barbara, you can answer it as well. What will your legacy be? What would your legacy look like to others?
Yeah. Well, this is what I pray that the legacy will look like. One of the things that I think is very important, been on many panels of various organizations, and they're always talking about the next generation. What is your succession plan? What does it look like? Are you even thinking about that? Or do you just want to hoard the stage, so to speak? Well, my interest is that I want to work with the generation of people in this industry of art and specifically publishing fine art that come after me. There is no roadmap. I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't have anyone one that I could really follow per se when I first started this. So my idea is to work with young artists, to work with mid-career artists, and to talk about developing their work, and not only their work, but to teach them more about the business of art with licensing and contracts and anything that has to do with intellectual property issues. That's one thing. The other thing is to deal directly with young people that have an interest in publishing art. Not everyone in the industry is going to be a fine artist that actually execute a work of art. They're going to be people that deal with the publishing side of the industry and working with people that create fine art from the development side. You know, that's a lost art right now. Developing seriographs and etchings and monoprints and all of the what they call original graphics. There are hardly any people that do that craft anymore. So my idea and what I would like to do from that perspective, Ted, is to help to develop that part of the industry, help the people in the
Mm,
industry that work in the area that I work in, publishing and doing original graphics. That's very, very important. We would not have nearly the historical value and the historical information that we have today had we not had people that, like Bob Blackburn, that did a lot of the work for some of the artists that we've been mentioning back and forth. You have other people like Lou Stovall that
mm-hmm.
dealt with Elizabeth Catlett, Jacob Lawrence work, and all of these things. If we didn't have those people to create that work in original graphic form, there would only be the originals. The originals will be gone to one person or one institution. But when you have the reproduction and done in a fine art fashion, now you have something that you can pass to many people around the world in the history that we value, the history that we know a lot about. Now we can take that and we can spread that information and create dialogue and conversation and dispel some of the things that are not true. And we can light or illuminate the truth about who we are and what we do.
Thank you, Keith.
You're
Barbara,
welcome.
what
Yes.
about your legacy?
Well, my legacy is so huge right now in what I'm thinking, and every day my mind keeps racing because I can uncover another set of things that the world needs to know about. But one of the most important things that I am determined to do and leave as a legacy is to tell the story and leave some documentation about those artists and those people that nobody knows about. As an example, next door to me, in growing up in Tuskegee, there was a world-class family, husband and wife team of sculptors. Their last names were Hathaway, and they developed the Booker T. Washington coin and designed that. They also were very famous for all their masks that they did. There was a series of death masks, but nobody knows about them. And a lot of those works were done using Alabama clay. And so we've got to tell that story and show their examples of their works. There's a world renowned composer, William L. Dawson, who did a Negro folk symphony. We've got to tell that story stronger so our people will know and our young people will know this. So my legacy is to dig out the stories that nobody's telling. And I think between Keith and I, we could probably do that and wear people down in doing the right thing to tell those stories and documenting their artwork properly. And don't just give it away. Tonight, when I listened to the earlier video, I heard a name that just made me jump out of my skin, Deborah Roberts. I started with Deborah Roberts when I lived in Austin, Texas, and she was a starting artist. And now look at her now. And those kinds of things make you feel so good because you bought a piece a long time ago, and now she's just everywhere. She's in Harper's Bazaar magazine.
With the
She's in your magazine. I mean, she's
Vogue.
everywhere.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
those are the kind of stories and the kind of people that we want to properly document. And that's what I hope my legacy will be.
Okay. Next question. Are there any books published on the art of historically Black colleges and universities?
That was
Bob?
done a good 25 years ago, 25, 30 years ago now, but it needs to be updated.
Okay. Now,
Um,
what about the book on the mural, the Hal Woodruff mural at Talladega?
I happen to have a copy sitting right here next to me. It's
Okay.
called Rising Up. And yes, it's a wonderful book, a wonderful document. It was done in support of Talladega College from the High Museum. And it is a wonderful, wonderful piece and a wonderful documented piece of those 7 wonderful murals and other works by Dr. Hale Woodruff.
Keith, this question probably better for you suited to answer. When we talk about diversity and inclusion and acquisition, have you had any opportunity with major corporations or museums on placing art in their permanent collection? Or do you still find that as a major challenge and
Yeah,
a
well,
disparity?
Ted, to answer your question, I have worked with various corporations on placing works of art, but to be truthful, it is still a major issue. You know, you have a few museums now that have stepped up to the plate and they want to have some of the more well known artists in their collections, but the focus is on the safe place with them. You know, everybody knows about Bearden and everybody knows about Jacob Lawrence and everybody knows about Elizabeth Catlett and Sam Gilliam and Richard Mayhew and so on and so on. But what I think we need is we need more inclusion, not just on a few artists, but we need more inclusion on the people that make the decisions about what should go into those places. When you have people that are not, truthfully being spoken, they're not that well educated on African American art and who's who to be able to make some of these informed decisions. You need to be informed to make informed decisions. So I think you need to have more people in these positions that have a wealth of knowledge about the artists that should be looked at. I agree that there are a lot of artists that we have never heard of that have masterful work, not just masterful work, but academically they are strong and should be considered for some of these things. You know, that was one of the reasons, Ted, that when we started our portfolio on social justice, the thing about, and I'm not just saying this because it was your work, but I chose the work that you had first because I liked the title and what it represented. Our time has come. Sometimes it takes a crazy thing to bring about a crazy change. And with all of the things that we're dealing with now with the pandemic and with the economy and social injustice and all of the things that we have with racial profiling and all of these disparities, it's come to a point that is starting to push forth a lot of good things that need to be considered. So we need to take this opportunity to dive in and do our very, very best. So, you know, our time is really here in terms of that, and we need to make the best of it.
Yes, I do think it has to have a level of of um, of involvement throughout our whole community. I don't think just one
Yes.
particular area is going to make that kind of impact. I mean, we need to see the vitality in the visual arts, in the arts period, on how to leverage the importance of it in fighting for our rights. I mean, it's just the way what the Black Arts Movement did in the in the 60s. It was an extension of the Black Power movement. There was political activism in the arts. The youth grabbed hold of it and they leveraged. You had the poets, you had the writers, you had the visual artists, you had entertainers, collaborating together, not just because of the beauty of the art, but how we live, how we face these injustices. It is power and activism through the art. And we need to give that more worth. I feel there's a level of cultural malnourishment in our communities because we have these high levels of inequity based around culture. If we can't support our own, don't expect others to do, or don't expect others to see value. When I look at the importance of cultural equity and how it's celebrated, how it's recognized, throughout the community at large. In every major epicenter of high commerce and trade, there's a major museum. 95% of the images that are being featured are non-African American, are people of color. We need more equity in that space. But you cannot just expect the artist and the art dealer to lobby that. We need folks in the community at large. We need business folks. We need political folks. We need the kind of activism that would build the awareness in our community to understand that it's significant. The artists always take the lead in speaking, taking the hit and being out in front. They ingest everything and they pour it out there. And just like they said earlier, the art will continue to outlast that artist, that living vessel. But the art lives into perpetuity and it carries a message. And so we have to realize how important the role that the artists play in our community, and and give it the foundation, give it the platform that's needed. African American institutions of work that's celebrated or underfinanced, or we actively, putting a charge in front of our politicians and business leaders to say that they need to be adequately funded so that they can put on programs that represent and speak to our existence and our importance. It's always a critical challenge. Yes, our time has come. I just read an article with the Carnegie Mellon Foundation, investing $250 million for equity in that space on programming and acquisition as it relates to giving a voice to the importance of African American culture. So I think as we continue to build, we got to work collaboratively together, not so much in a silo. We have to have a comprehensive plan that touches every part of our community. Our organizations and their mission and vision statement should have a reason and a cause to put the arts as a high priority in moving the needle. We talk about working toward excellence, but so often in the cultural space, we leave that out of the equation. And it's so critically important. That's why Margaret Burroughs, Elizabeth Catlett, were very purpose in building cultural institutions. The DeSable Museum, the Charles Wright Museum, the African American Studies program at Howard University, and beyond that, the museums that Samela Lewis created on the West Coast, and the high level of activism of Elizabeth Catlett was very intentional. So we have to see the value in what's being done in our community as it relates to the preservation of culture and our history, and those that are committed to it, that commit their life work to it, their passion and their purpose for it. So with that said, we can go ahead and take a few more questions before we go through our closure. I'm just checking to see if there's any other additional questions from the audience. Barbara, is there anything you want to share before we close?
Well, I thought Keith's comments were right on spot in mentioning art and getting art into the corporate world. The most rewarding story that I've heard regarding that, there's an artist out of Atlanta, Aaron Henderson, who has two sons, and his sons are both engineers by training, as is Aaron. And the sons decided they were going to quit their corporate jobs and work on their father and promoting their father, because they said they don't want their father's works to be found at a garage sale 10, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, and him not get the recognition that he so deserves. And I thought that was so phenomenal that a whole family just went on lockdown and decided they were going to just take the helm with their father's works. And it's been a phenomenal experience. But they have been very strategic in their efforts to push their father's works and promote their father's works and get some of his works into major corporations. And I think that's the kind of thing we have to do sometimes. If you can't get your family behind you, then you got to get your community and some of these organizations, all these organizations around here. We need to be then everybody's got an arts component, but let's make it bigger than that, so that you can be a part of promoting these artists and getting their works into the public as they so deserve.
Well, Keith sort of answered that one about the disparity in the art world. A lot of this, when we talk about equity in the space of museums, that having our narrative being told, it has been a challenge to get that opportunity to have that equity in that space, because a lot of times on the administrative side, there's no African Americans to be there to lobby for it. And so if you're absent in that space on planning activities and programs, then it never ever happens. And so the young curators that come in are typically non-African American. And if they are African Americans, then they sort of have to go along with the program because they're so young. They don't want to disturb or upset what is happening. When they create the plans and the programs of what's going to be presented every 2 or 3 years inside of that cultural institution. Now things are changing because folks are saying, in public trust, and you're looking at the demographics and the shift, and you see that America is coloring, that it's not just a European history that is important. There are others history that needs to be shared, and those images need to be seen. And so we're going through that transition, but it's still not in a way that it's equitable. There's not 13% of the museums out there that's showing 13% of the population that we represent. And it's systemic even when we look at the public works opportunities and engagement. There's a big disparity in that. We have a couple of opportunities that have happened on a large scale, and we look at Kehinde Wiley's Rumors of War, that's at the Capitol in Richmond, Virginia. That is a major statement, because if you know anything about the history of the Daughters of Confederate and the Southern monuments all across the southern hemisphere of the United States, their headquarters is in Richmond, Virginia. And so that's a major statement when we're talking about social justice and social reformation and change, to have a statue done by a living African American artist that is a contemporary image of an African American. That's unprecedented. And so things are happening, but I would like to see them move more expeditiously. And that only happens if we're lobbying, if we're advocating for those changes to happen within our community. So what I suggest is that we continue to support the artists, the institutions that are supporting artists of color, African American artists, that are intentional about, having a message and a purpose with their art, and then to avail corporations and foundations to support initiatives and programs that will give visibility to the creations and the statements that African American artists are creating or speaking with their talent, the level of creativity. The same thing that Benny Andrews and the Spiral Art Movement with Jacob Lawrence and Romare Bearden, the same thing that Samela Lewis is doing right now at 90 plus years of age in Los Angeles, California, is to keep the awareness visible in this space. I applaud Pigment International for doing that, for the DeSable Museum for partnering. We need more collaboratives in that space. We need to spread the importance of it. To give visibility this month for Black Fine Art Month is huge. And I would also implore the other area of the arts to see the value and the significance of visual artists and their contributions. We have the Smithsonian African American Museum that's in Washington, D.C. Before COVID, was still receiving an unrecorded amount of individuals participating in that museum on an international level. And there's been wonderful engagement in this virtual space. We're able to reach an audience that we possibly couldn't reach if we just had a bricks and mortars opportunity. So we can find ways. We're resilient in that space, that we can speak and share the importance of our culture and our history. Again, I want to thank Pigment International, the DeSable Museum, all three of our panelists, Barbara Dunn Harrington, Key Golden, Dr. Addie Dawson Yuba, for giving us this opportunity. Everyone, have a great evening, and thank you.
Pigment International and the DeSable Museum of African American History, in association with New Day Culture, present the second annual Black Fine Art Month celebration under the theme, A Woman's Work. A month-long virtual experience celebrates Black women making profound contributions in the fine arts arena. It features weekly panel discussions with art world luminaries exploring the contemporary Black aesthetic and a virtual exhibition. For full details, visit blackfineartmonth.com. That's blackfineartmonth.com.